Hi guys, and in this video I'm going to explain how you can legally fly your drone above 400 feet while still abiding by all FAA Part 107 rules and regulations. In addition to this, I'm going to comment on some considerations you should make while flying above 400 feet and how you can always ensure you're doing it legally and keeping others safe. So without further ado, let's jump right in on how you are able to fly above 400 feet. For those that don't know, the FAA has a rule set in place that the max altitude you can fly your drone, unmanned aircraft, whatever you want to call it, is 400 feet above ground. Now the FAA has this rule in place for an obvious reason. They want to keep manned traffic, which carries real people, and thus drone pilots, separated by having at least a 100-foot altitude gap. Without this, you could very much face a collision between a manned aircraft and a drone, which would not only be lethal to the pilot, but also a very bad name to the drone community and would just create a lot of issues. So to fix this, the FAA created a 400-foot rule that typically cannot be broken. However, we're going to get into how you can legally get around this law now. According to Part 107 rules, Section 107.51, you can legally fly your drone above 400 feet as long as you are within a 400-foot radius of the tallest structure. This means if there's a building that's 100 feet tall, you're able to fly 500 feet above ground as long as you're within a 400-foot radius of this building. Looking here, you can see I took my Mavic Air 2 down to the Anadarko Towers located in the Woodlands, Texas. To determine the height of the building, I first flew to the top of it roughly, and then I put my gimbal to 0 tilt. The gimbal having 0 degrees of tilt, or 0 degrees of rotation, allows the gimbal to be facing level with the horizon. This means using the center point that I enabled in the app, as long as the crosshairs are aligned with the top of the building, I get a pretty good estimate of how tall the Anadarko building is. Looking here, you can see the Anadarko Tower is about 430 feet, so this means I could fly up to 830 feet. Now, although to be safe, I typically subtract about 50 feet from this, and in this flight I only went up to 800 feet, giving me a 30-foot buffer zone, you could theoretically fly all the way up to 830 feet above ground. Now, although this is legal to do, and the footage that you can get from it looks amazing, it almost seems as if you're in a news helicopter or a small light aircraft, there are a few considerations we need to take a look at. Firstly, you need to consider wind speed. The higher you fly, the more likely it is for the wind to get stronger. Although most DJI and other reputable named drones are fairly wind resistant, it isn't completely foolproof. Say you were flying in a large city where you could violate this 400-foot rule most of the time, and you were cruising at about 900 feet above ground. If you do a long distance flight away from you and need to return to home and you're facing a 15-mile-per-hour headwind, if you don't give yourself enough battery reserves, oftentimes you might not be able to make it back to your home point. So always consider wind, its direction, and the speed at which it's affecting the aircraft before you do a long distance flight or flight away from your home point. Another consideration when flying in a city environment is either tourist or medical helicopters. Helicopters, both on the civilian side, military side, and medical side, have all been known to fly relatively close to cities as either tourist or a life flight needs. The last thing to note city-wise is the potential interference you could face. If you're flying around and suddenly you go behind a building, interrupting the signal between your remote and your drone, it's not uncommon for you to lose signal. Therefore, in the event of signal loss, it is crucial your return to home altitude is higher than the tallest building. Therefore, in this video, you might notice my return to home altitude was about 450 feet. Knowing that the tallest Anadarko Tower is 430 feet, the 450 feet is what the drone would ascend to before it would return to home, so either way I would have a 20-foot gap in between the tower and the drone in the event of signal loss. Now that we are done with most of the city considerations, we'll move on to a consideration I didn't really expect, but faced multiple times during my flight. Surprisingly enough, I had a lot of close encounters with birds. As I was happily flying along, it wasn't uncommon for a vulture or hawk to buzz my aircraft, giving me quite a scare as all of a sudden a bird would flash across the screen on my DJI Fly app. Again, this isn't really something I was expecting, and they never did run into it. I highly doubt they would run into it unless they saw it as a threat they needed to take out of the sky. Just be aware of it, and just know birds could potentially interfere with your aircraft. Stepping away from the considerations, we'll talk about how you can tell if you're 400 feet away from the building. Most advanced drones, or ones that you'd feel comfortable bringing up to high altitudes, have a built-in app that allow you to set a home point. The DJI Go 4 app, the DJI Fly app, and I'm pretty sure Autel Explorer if you're using an Autel drone, all allow you to update your home point to a custom location. So an easy way I found to tell if I were 400 feet away from the building, because again, you're only allowed to fly within a 400-foot radius of the tallest structure, was to update my home point, dragging it over the building. By placing my home point directly over the center of the Anadarko Tower, I knew if my distance was within 400 feet, I was within a 400-foot bubble of the building. One neat thing to consider in this, and as you can see here, since the Anadarko Towers are a twin set of buildings, I was able to travel about 1,200 feet away from the first Anadarko Tower, as its neighboring tower almost extended the 400-foot bubble another 800 feet. Although that's a little bit confusing, looking here at the app again, I reset the position above the new tower, and therefore I'm able to fly about 1,200 feet in a straight direction from the first tower to the second, and then 400 past that, and it was able to get a nice looking shot. Another common building / feature to want to film is a cell tower or something like that. Most cell towers extend well above the 400-foot mark, so it's an easy way to get a lot of altitude while still staying legal. However, cell towers do offer some unique challenges we need to talk about. The first thing to consider with cell towers, and the primary reason that they get a lot of drone pilots into trouble, is the potential interference you could face. I've heard multiple stories of a drone pilot flying super well, and then suddenly when they go behind the tower, they lose connection with their remote controller. Most modern DJI drones will then most likely enter the return to home phase and everything would be okay. However, if you're flying something that is not able to guide itself home, losing signal near your cell tower could be detrimental. Although I personally have never had a problem with 5G rolling out, we're still not completely sure to see how the 5G and new and improved signal is going to affect our remote controls. Typically, the DJI app will either transmit data in 2.4 or 5 GHz, and this 5 GHz may or may not interfere with the new 5G, so just keep in mind when flying that interference could be a big potential when flying near cell towers. The next thing to keep in mind with cell towers is the lines that stabilize them and extend from the side. These lines are oftentimes invisible to the human eye, especially if you're flying on an FPV app. These lines can extend multiple hundred feet away from the tower, and if you run into them, it'll most likely result in a crash. So, to be safe when flying near cell towers, make sure to always do a nice pre-flight walk around, see what you're dealing with, scope out all the lines, and then do a range test to see if there's any potential interference. A very easy way to do a range test is to set the drone on the opposite side of the cell tower, walk behind it, or somewhere that the signal would be, having to cross between your remote, the cell tower, and then to the drone, and see if you still have signal, and if so, you should be good to go. To avoid the lines, again, simply just look for them, be aware of them when flying, and if you're flying FPV, having your spotter, which is a legal requirement, just watch and make sure you're not going to run into them. The last thing to consider when flying near cell towers or any property is that it could be private. I've heard a few stories of companies such as Verizon, AT&T not wanting drone pilots near their towers for safety and privacy. So always keep in mind there's a chance that the tower that you're flying near could be private property and the owner of it wants nothing to do with you flying near it or filming it. However, looking online or making sure on the Before You Fly app that it's not private property is an easy way to fix this. Overall, being able to legally fly above 400 feet is a big privilege we as drone pilots have. As long as you do it safely, legally, and make sure you take the time before you fly to make sure everything's in order, such as setting your return to home altitude above the tallest structure, making sure there's no interference, and scoping out where any potential hazards could be, flying above 400 feet is a fantastic way to get very neat and almost movie-like shots. I highly encourage you, if you have a drone that's capable, to go out and try it. Again, be safe about it, go try it, get some cool footage, and share it online for people to see. In conclusion, remember the 400-foot law states you're able to fly 400 feet above the nearest tallest structure as long as you're not outside of a 400-foot radius. So remember the 400-400-foot rule. I'd like to thank you guys all for taking the time to check out this video. Let me know what you think of it in the comments below. As always, if you liked it, give it a like. If you did not like it, give it a dislike. And I'd be happy to respond to any comments you guys have. So again, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.